At the moment in South Australia, we have record amounts in our state coffers. The previous Liberal government sold off our electricity utilities to wipe out state debt. We've got the influx of the money from the GST, plus there's the windfall coming from stamp duty resulting from the increasing value of real estate. In addition, we've got a AAA credit rating which theoretically allows the state to borrow it at cheaper interest rates, particularly if it wanted to borrow it to invest in appropriate infrastructure. But as peak oil begins to impact, the money coming into state coffers through taxation will reduce. So the moment to act is now, when economies are strong. Waiting to take action will exacerbate the pain. The planning ought to have been in place 5 years ago so that the infrastructure could be being built now. There are some basic actions that can be taken in response to peak oil, but that ought not to require recommendations from a committee. However, governments and their associated bureaucracies are hard to move to action. Unfortunately, South Australia does not even have a transport plan, 6 years after the ALP made an election promise that it would do so. If it had even the faintest understanding of what peak oil was about, this government in South Australia would have one in place and there would be massive public transport infrastructure development. Unfortunately, apart from the extension of our tram line by 1 kilometre and the re-sleepering of one railway line, that is all that is happening. The transport infrastructure budget instead is being spent almost entirely on roads, with one underpass having just been opened 6 weeks ago, another 2, and that's for roads, and another 2 under construction also for roads, and there's an extension of the Northern Interconnector, also a road, close to completion. So it's all roads. Because oil is inexhaustible, it seems, and the prices won't go up and everyone will be driving their cars in 5 or 10 years' time just like they do now, and pigs will fly. As I've indicated, my motion for an inquiry looks like it will succeed in some form. However, the government in supporting it showed they still don't understand the urgency of the issue, or else the Minister hadn't read my speech. Because when he responded, he talked about the need to encourage more petroleum exploration, the impending report of a planning review which he says will address the issue of the higher costs of transport fuels, and passing legislation to allow geosequestration. What? The Minister failed to address numerous aspects of the motion, including the impact on tourism, primary industries, the mooted mining boom, the advent of fuel poverty, and that wonderful term of reference H, optimum and sustainable levels of population under these constraints. That is so important because South Australia's strategic plan advocates population growth. And what they're talking about is increasing South Australia's population to 2 million by 2050 with an interim target of 1.64 million by 2014. At the same time, they aim to reduce annual net interstate migration loss to 0 by 2010, with a net inflow thereafter to be sustained through to 2014. They're aiming to increase net overseas migration by 8,500 per annum by 2014. And they want to maintain a rate of at least 1.7 births per woman. Now, nowhere in the state strategic plan is transport energy even mentioned. So obviously there's no mention of peak oil. So it's not surprising that issues such as urban sprawl and transport poverty don't get a look in. There is a chance that actions to reduce the impact of climate change will be to the benefit of reducing impacts of peak oil, so I suppose the Minister's response to include geosequestration is valid. But there are limiters here. The targets in our climate change legislation passed last year are not obligatory, and changing from a coal-fired power plant, for instance, to wind turbines will not address the issue of transport fuel. My motion to set up a select committee will force some MPs to consider peak oil, probably for the first time. In addition, I hope that the committee investigation will see at least one MP from the Labor Party and one MP from the Liberal Party gain some of the sense of urgency that I have about the need to address peak oil. I've couched my motion in terms that will have more appeal to the old parties with an emphasis on economics. I've been careful not to criticise governments for their lack of understanding or action. But I think when the members of that committee start to find out what is going to happen, when they find that so much of the green revolution that was able to achieve anything is about to finish, that so much of our agriculture, like 50% of it, is dependent on the petrochemical industry, I hope they're going to become worried. And when they find that the fishing industry, with its boats travelling greater and greater distances every year as fish catches reduce, with its consequent impacts in terms of the huge transport oil for those boats, I hope that they'll be very worried about that. And when they discover that exporting products, which is very, very important in modern economies because of balance of trades, will become prohibitively expensive, I hope they'll be worried about that. And if a few members become worried, then they might take that message back to their political parties and we could start seeing some action. From my perspective, if it takes state governments to concentrate the thinkings of Australians, then good on them. The advantage that accrues from a state taking action first is not necessarily of an advantage of one state over another either. It means that that state is effectively putting itself ahead of where it might otherwise have been. And when one state takes action, others look and wonder why they're not doing the same. It's most frustrating to know what needs to be done, and we, all of us here, see that in terms of population. And to have to go about this in a manner of cajoling people into seeing things our way. Politicians beginning to understand peak oil is occurring at the same rate as they did with climate change, and on that basis we could see action delayed for another 2 decades. It's crucial therefore that states do take action, and that territories take action, and that local government takes action. So, is peak oil states' business? My answer is, quite frankly, I don't care whose business it is, just as long as someone is doing something about it.
Thank you. Ross McIndoe is my name. Sandra, I don't think you're pessimistic at all. You're delightfully realistic, and I think have highlighted one of the big dilemmas that we face as a group in getting the leadership of our various levels of government to take the necessary action and take it promptly and get on with the job. I was impressed to see the bloke at the conference in Bali saying to some of the world leaders, if you're not willing to take leadership, get it out of the way and let us get on with the job. It's a bit the way I feel after hearing you speaking. On the other hand, it's gratifying to know that there are in the state and federal parliaments parliamentary groups for
population and development.
For population and development, yeah. But I'm anxious to know what the members of those groups mean when they talk about population and development. Are they talking about population growth? Are they talking about economic development, economic growth, or sustainable economic growth? Some of those things, it seems to me, are just frankly incompatible, and that we can't have a sustainable population and sustainable economic growth. We've got to have one or the other, but not both. And I hope our politicians realise that if we really want a sustainable population and to protect our environment and ecology, we're going to have to make some real sacrifices in terms of economic growth and development.